Tim serves as Winchester's Certified Local Government CLG Coordinator as designated by the Virginia Department of Historic Resources. He recently led CLG-funded efforts to amend the existing Winchester National Historic District, including a change to the period of significance for determining contributing historic resources, as well as a major expansion of the National Register District, adding nearly 500 resources to the district. Tim and his wife Midge reside in Winchester and have three grown children. So please welcome Tim Youmans.
Okay, that's our presentation for today.
That's all the time you get.
First question, either you have a very varied and interesting background or you have a hard time keeping a job. I'm trying to figure out, you have all these different jobs here, but you kept one for a long time.
These, as I tell people, when I'm talking about history, local history is my passion, but planning director is my profession. So the latter one is what pays the bills at home and stuff. But I do very much enjoy giving presentations about what I'm involved with as far as local history. And really the last part, well maybe the second last part, what Ed mentioned in terms of my designation by the city and the state as the Certified Local Government CLG Coordinator for the City of Winchester. That's what's really most relevant to the work that I've been doing last year, where I presented about the change to the period of significance for the existing National Historic District, and then today's first part of a two-part presentation, which is the expansion of that National District. Those are CLG funded things. I'm just going to go through the slides here. There are some handouts there, the layouts. Bruce, I think there's some up on the front table here if you want to grab one. So we have a small group, and so that lends itself to kind of an interactive thing. If anybody has any questions, as we're going through the slides, I'm perfectly comfortable answering questions as we go through them or after. I'll leave some time in between this presentation about the expansion and the follow-up presentation about the National Avenue Corridor Enhancement District. But this effort to expand the National Register District is what was our 2015 Certified Local Government Grant-Funded activity. It enlarges the existing National District that has about 1,200 historic resources and allows us to distinguish between historic resources that are designated as contributing, meaning they retain integrity in terms of their architectural style, versus those that are non-contributing, that perhaps they're not old enough to meet the 50-year criteria, or they have been altered to a degree where they have lost integrity in terms of what their original purpose was and or architectural style. So a couple different things can kick a resource into a non-contributing status. And the current nomination effort, which is still working its way through in terms of National Register listing, it does have state landmark registry designation at this point, but we're still awaiting the National Park Service announcement on the National Register designation. It builds off of a survey that was done in 2011, 2012 timeframe. So back when we had engaged EHT Traceries Company to do a study of these possible expansion areas, the blue line here basically outlines the existing National Register District, including some additions up here along North Cameron Street. And the red line is the boundary of the local HW, Historic Winchester District. So you can see here, for instance, the local district kind of comes in differently than the National Register District. And then as we get up in this area of the city, quite a bit of variation between the local district where the Board of Architectural Review has input versus the national district where property owners can qualify for state and or federal tax credits. So part of the guidance with regard to expanding the district was to certainly look at areas that are already in the local district, such as out along West Boscawen and Amherst Street, and some other areas where we were already in the local district, to get those into the national district, because it didn't make sense that we were requiring people to get certificates of appropriateness from the local board, but not allowing them to take advantage of the tax credits available at the national level. So the coloring here doesn't really make much difference in terms of today's effort. This is kind of a status map of where they had done their survey versus where they still needed to go out. The area up here to the northeast, which is along National Avenue and then Island Avenue and Gray Avenue, some of the streets there in what typically is called the north end, that's actually going to be handled through a separate effort as part of a northeast historic district, separate from the Winchester National District. So there's two main areas out along Amherst Street, which also connects down along Stewart Street and the area around the old hospital, and then separated by South Washington, another area that's in between Pall Mall Street and Girard, well, Pall Mall and Girard basically are the boundaries there. In the end, working with a new consultant, Dan Pisani with Landmark Preservation Associates, we came to a boundary that we felt was appropriate for this nomination effort. So this builds off of the original district that was established in 1979 based on survey from 1976. And the reconnaissance work for this expansion area was also a CLG funded project that EHT Traceries, consultant that city contracted with back in 2012, had done. So we arrived at basically two areas, the area out to the west and around the old hospital, and then separately the area there along Pall Mall Street in between Washington Street on the west end and South Kent on the east end. Just hit the right buttons here. Sorry, I don't have a slide advancer. So again, the existing district in this case is outlined in green, and the proposed expansion areas, including a large segment of Glen Burnie property that I'll address in a minute, and then kind of coming down around the old hospital here, including all of South Stewart Street, and then separately this area down here in between the properties already in the district on Pall Mall Street and the northern side of Girard Street. So for each property, it was mapped. We worked with our local GIS, Geographic Information System department here at the city. Annie Williams and Kate Hill now did a wonderful job of showing the mapping. This is the coding that's used on the maps, and these are now part of the VCRIS system that the Department of Historic Resources maintains. And if you have subscribed to it or otherwise have electronic access, you can pull up the Winchester Historic District, both the existing one as well as this expansion area. But I'm going to lose my laser pointer here. So the little circles basically, that indicates a contributing secondary resource, a triangle on the property, such as up here with a number in it. That indicates the number of non-contributing secondary resources that are there. As far as the contributing primary resources, they are distinguished from non-contributing with this pattern. So the dotted pattern shows where we have contributing primary resources, such as single-family residence, which is the predominant use in the expansion area, separate from, say, the office building where Winchester Surgical Associates were, or the brand new office building that Mr. Kilmer constructed there at the corner of South Stewart Street and Port Street. The other interesting thing was that Winchester Medical Center, well, the old hospital now, that was determined to be entirely non-contributing, not because it was too new necessarily, although parts of it were newer than 50 years, but because they had altered it so much with what was taken away. So in addition to the coded map, we also had a tabular listing, and you can see this is just an example from the 600, 700 block of South Stewart Street. It has the resource number that DHR uses to index the nomination, and then also gives you a description of the primary resource and any secondary resources. It indicates whether those are contributing or non-contributing, gives you the date of it, and for most of them we also get the architectural style. Quite a few colonial revivals, particularly along South Stewart Street there. So let's kind of look at the district kind of in pieces here, where you can kind of get a sense for what we're including. This is Amherst Street, kind of hard to see on the graphic here, and then this is where Boscawen Street branches off near the Working Man Store, and the Winchester Little Theater would be about here. There was a lot of effort that went into determining how much of the Glass Glen Burning Foundation property should be included. Very difficult to see here, but this is where the old house is in this area, and then the new museum of Shenandoah Valley will be down in the back here. So when people think of the historic portion of the Glen Burning property, certainly they think of the historic home and some of the accessory buildings around that, including the gardens, the cemetery, the Pink Pavilion. But the rules in terms of determining boundaries for a National Register District nomination said that you had to include an entirely platted parcel. Well, Glass Glen Burning Foundation has about 4 or 5 parcels. They mean absolutely nothing to us. They mean nothing to Glass Glen Burning. In fact, they're intending to consolidate this portion of their land holdings into the larger tract. So this was a real source of contention with DHR staff, with the consultant that the city hired, and just a source of frustration for us, because we would update the maps, and then another person from DHR would say, oh, no, you need to include this, and then would come back, oh, no, you need to scale it back. It's only, and we spent a lot of time and effort trying to finally resolve this before the September 17th State Review Board meeting. But other resources in this area, obviously, Home for Preservation of Historic Winchester, there, the Hexagon House on the north side of Amherst Street. You can see that this boundary notches in, so the buildings that many of the locals know as the old Superfresh or A&P store, and the, was it Rite Aid, I guess, drugstore is next door. Those are not included in the district. They were considered non-contributing because of the alterations. And so there was quite a bit of debate where Selma Medical Associates is. They kind of took a very old Steele's Tavern structure there, but altered it so much with all the additions around it, particularly the massive addition to the east there, that there was quite a bit of debate there. That was not going to be included. At the last minute, DHR said, yes, include the whole Selma property. So quite a bit of effort went into this particular portion of the expansion area. As we come into town then, this is Boscawen Street coming in and Amherst Street coming in to where Stewart Street extends north-south. So the Winchester Little Theater shows up here as a contributing resource, but the Handy Mart on the corner, because of its alterations over the years, excuse me, that was designated as non-contributing. This very irregular boundary that you see here is a result of the original district from 1979. So all we're doing is basically matching up exactly to that. And if you worked with mapping at all, that was a huge challenge to try to figure out where they were drawing these boundaries, because as we got into looking at the detailed survey that they had down in Richmond, we realized that their boundaries did not correspond to current property boundaries. And Will, I know you can appreciate the challenges from a cartographic standpoint, trying to reconcile these inconsistencies of what was there. And they basically say, we don't care if we were wrong in 1979, match up to that boundary, it goes right down through the middle of the house. So in many instances, this boundary shows up as going right through some structures, and so we said, okay, if this is what we need to do, we'll do it. Important on this one, this is kind of the upper portion of South Stewart Street, as well as the area of Morgan Street and the westernmost portion of West Piccadilly Street. So you have the residential area up there that's now being included in the National District. It's already in the local district, so that's a good example of a neighborhood that will now have the benefits of the historic tax credits if property owners so choose. But the other notable thing that shows up here, at least a portion of it, is 333 West Cork Street, the old hospital. I've got a historical aerial photo here. You can see the old part of the hospital that they tore away shows up here. So this tower here, with kind of the glass wall here, that was basically the limits of what they kept, the taller portion there. Everything closer to Stewart Street, out along Cork Street, or Stewart Street, yeah, along Cork Street and Clifford Street out in the front was pretty much converted to a park area here. So in the end, because of the significant alterations and demolitions, DHR said no, even though that's a property that would benefit dramatically from those state and federal tax credits, we cannot determine it to be contributing. So unfortunately, the new owners of that property are not going to be able to utilize the state and federal income tax credits for historic preservation. And as it turns out, they probably will pursue some kind of new development in this area. As we head further south on Stewart Street here, this comes all the way down to where Hanley Boulevard is situated. So beside that, all the properties on the South Washington Street frontage down to Hanley Boulevard are already in the district. So we're now extending the district over to include homes on both sides of South Stewart Street. The district also extends out Leicester Street to Hanley Avenue and extends north and then continues. It actually goes out and around up to Academy Circle. That actually shows up on the previous map a little bit. No, I lied. Doesn't show up on that. Shows up on the overall map. So everything that is in behind the hospital there, that's now included in the district. So properties along both sides of West Cecil and along the north side of West Leicester, those are included in the district. And you have a lot of colonial revival along South Stewart Street, as well as some of those side streets out near the old hospital. Also quite a bit of craftsman style, including American Foursquare. Yes, Bruce?
Tim, I have two questions. My wife has two questions. Number one, she wants me to confirm that she can still make exterior changes to 5 Pound South Stewart Street. Very serious, I'm not joking. Without having to go to the ER. That is
Got a slide coming up that makes that crystal clear.
And secondly, and she wants to know how she qualifies for, how we qualify for tax credits.
Yeah, as an owner-occupied single-family residence, you're probably not gonna be eligible for some of the credits and things. I'm not the expert on use of those, but if you had an income-producing property, you would be able to utilize them. Less likely that you'd be able to use. I think
I think you can, with an owner occupied, you can use state tax
state,
credits.
right?
State tax credits. Okay.
Federal tax credits, you have to have income producing.
Okay. Okay.
But let me get to that
Sorry,
discussion about the exterior changes there. So continuing then, well, I need to go back here, I'm sorry. So the other thing that shows up on this map is this area here in between Girard Street and the properties on the south side of Paul Mall, actually the north side of Paul Mall, take that back. So that's separated from the existing district that extends all the way down Washington Street. This is an area that's characterized more by worker housing, quite different than what we have out along Stewart Street, but nonetheless, in terms of the concentration of structures that are over 50 years of age and retain their integrity, that was an area that was included. And kind of zooming in, this is the last portion of the eastern portion of that. That is characterized by some of the structures you see along South 10th Street. So some of the American Foursquare separate dwellings on the east side, and then some of the row houses, including this structure with the brick row houses there at the intersection of South 10th Street and East Paul Mall Street. So that's it in terms of the expansion area. These are the various architectural styles that were found in the district. We even have one Mission or Spanish style structure out on, I believe on Lee Street. We have some of the modern or commercial development, including what used to be the Amherst Diner. I'm one of those people who's just going to always call it the Amherst Street Diner. I guess I'm not supposed to do that anymore. But particularly along those side streets, a lot of the craftsman style, especially the American Foursquare and colonial style, including some capes, some Dutch colonial revival. Those are really the two predominant architectural styles that we find in this expansion area. Along Amherst Street, particularly like with the Glen Burnie property, and some of the ones that are closer into Stewart Street there along West Boscawen, and on Amherst you start to see some of the Italianate, the Federal, Georgian, and even some Queen Anne, Victorian style structures. As you get down in the area along Pall Mall Street, closer to Girard, you're dealing more kind of nondescript or traditional architecture, not as much of the distinct styles otherwise. So overall, we added in nearly 400 resources to the existing district that are designated as contributing structures. Most of those are buildings. Sites would include the cemetery and gardens out at Glen Burnie. I think this is the boxcar at the Winchester Little Theater. Most of these 5 structures that are considered non-contributing are things out at Glass Glen Burnie that look old but actually were constructed as reproductions. And there was quite a bit of debate there too. Things that you might think really are old were actually built in the 60s and 70s as reproductions by Julian Glass, actually by the Rhodes brothers here in town. So 102 non-contributing structures, so it's kind of a 4-to-1 ratio in terms of contributing versus non-contributing. And that adds to about 1,200 resources that we have in the existing district. So it's a pretty significant expansion. Within the expansion area, there also were 6 resources that were already individually designated. And I'm guessing that Hexagon House is one of those, certainly Glen Burnie. Most recently would have been Hawthorne private residence Lewis has had. And they included the Spring House out in front of that along Amherst Street, which is owned by the city.
Tim, I got a good question for you.
Yes.
If you have a non-contributing structure in the historic district, you have to go to BAR.
If you are also in the local district, yes.
Okay. Are you held to the same requirements as a contributing structure?
You shouldn't be. No, that's the idea, is that you want to emphasize preservation of contributing architecture and not worry so much about the non-contributing architecture. It's already damaged.
Yeah. So if you want to replace windows, you're in the historic district, but if you've got a non-contributing building, you would be allowed to do vinyl windows.
The BAR should allow more leniency on it.
What standard would you use that?
So when the 1976 survey was done for the existing district, there was not a distinction made between contributing and non-contributing. So it let, when you were on the BAR, for instance, you didn't have that information available to evaluate projects and distinguish which ones should be allowed to make alterations more so than others. Now that we have the updated existing district and we have this expansion for those properties, particularly those, and this kind of addresses the question you asked earlier, the national district is distinct from the local district. In the national district, you do not need to get BAR approval for exterior alterations the way you would if you are also in the local district. So this does help in terms of property owners who, for instance, out along West Boscawen Street, Amherst Street, they're already in the local district, they have to go to BAR. Well, now we at least have better information in terms of the inventory of which ones are contributing and which ones are not contributing. But the key here is that the designation as being part of the National Registered District does not automatically alter the local district. And City Council has made it very clear, and I agree with them, we have no intentions of expanding the local district. This was one of the fears that arose early particularly from a lot of the owners of properties of very historic looking homes along South Stewart Street and out along not Amherst Street, but some of the other areas that were not already in the local district. They said, is this the camel's nose under the tent to kind of bring our house into the local district because we don't want anything to do with the BAR? And we had to convince them that that was the case, and it is. There's nothing coming along after this to say, oh, now that you're in the national district, you might as well fall subject to review by the BAR. No, that's not the case. But the BAR is kind of that stick, I guess, if you look at carrots and sticks in terms of incentives and regulatory control. We have, particularly out along Amherst Street, the requirement, and Morgan Street is a good example, where they had to adhere to the strict guidance of the board, but they weren't eligible for the state and federal tax credits. So now, particularly the commercial properties like Working Man's Store, like The Winchester Little Theater, for example, I think they're intending to use something like $250,000 worth of historic tax credits. And so they're very excited about this being done. Time frame, we've been through most of the necessary steps. The most recent milestone was the state designation on the Virginia Landmark Registry. And so we're anticipating that DHR will complete the information that they have to package for the Park Service within the next week or two, and they anticipate by mid-December we will be officially designated as an expanded national district. So I think this is the last slide pertaining to the district expansion. Some of the benefits, talked about some of this already in terms of improved inventory, the distinction between contributing and non-contributing architecture. That's particularly helpful to the Board of Architectural Review for those properties that are otherwise already in the local district. It expands our inventory in terms of properties that we can promote redevelopment on, utilizing the state or federal tax credits. And the thing that DHR likes to emphasize quite often is that it helps, in terms of expanding the awareness and appreciation of these very valuable resources that we have in Winchester from a historic, architectural, and cultural standpoint. It's not just about, setting property owners up for those state and federal tax credits. That's a nice incentive, but there's this broader kind of goal of creating more awareness. And so the project that the Little Theater is doing, for example, that's something that is right now probably the premier project in terms of utilizing the credits. Yes?
So just to make sure I understand, so if I live on Stewart Street and I was not part of the local, but we are now part of the national, I don't need to do anything with the VAR if I want to replace a door, windows?
No.
Okay.
Just slap up the vinyl siding and the windows and the fake
Not doing
slate.
that. I don't like my front door there.
I have a client who has an income-producing property on National Avenue that I believe would fall into contributing. But I understood you to say that that's being handled separately.
It is, yes.
So what would I tell my client in terms of the status of his property as far as what's planned?
You gave me the perfect segue to the second part of the
Okay,
presentation.
good.
I didn't disappoint you. So let's unless there's another question about the historic district expansion,
I'll have one quick one. I've already gotten calls about when I'm going to get the updated inventory sheets for homeowners seeking, information on their homes.
Yeah.
Do you have any kind of timeline on that?
So Dan Pisani with Landmark Preservation Associates out of Lexington, Virginia, he was who we contracted with. We have a paper copy, and I have one with me. There were some changes, but a lot of the information stayed the same from what EHG Traceries had done. Unlike the change to the period of significance for the existing district, we did not get those bound documents like we had. Those are wonderful, but it doesn't include this expansion area. So I think probably the best thing is if you have access to the BCRIS, that's the easiest or the most direct resource. Otherwise, I guess contacting me as a city CLG representative, I can get that information for you, and I can certainly print off the list. That we're only talking about 400 properties here, so it's a manageable list. Yes.
When was the hospital originally built, and when was that renovation done?
I think the earliest part of the hospital dates back to 1902, if I'm not mistaken. And that would have been like over in this area here, I believe. A lot of this part out here, it's 1920s, 1930s, 1940s. How many locals were born in the old hospital? From a preservation standpoint, the part that would have been most eligible for the tax credits was the part that they tore away out front to create the park. So the pancake back here, I think, if I'm not mistaken, that was like 1970s, early 80s maybe, stuff. And the tower that they did retain, I think, was perhaps from the 60s or 70s. Not a lot of this. And then, of course, where they ripped away the old hospital, they just kind of put these kind of large glazed areas there. So I can understand why the architectural historian said, no, that doesn't retain the integrity of the old house. Okay, any other questions about the historic district expansion? All right, we'll move into the second part. Yes, one.
How did we find out if we were contributing or not contributing?
I've got the listing. We can look at that after I'm done today. So if you're on the Stewart Street, you said, I think that the hospital and the Winchester Surgical Clinic's old office building and the brand new office building that Mike Kilmer built, I think those are the only 3 structures on South Stewart Street that are non-contributing. So,
Are they all part of the survey that was done in 2011?
yes.
So you could also get a copy of that survey from Sandra.
I don't have Stewart Street.
Oh.
That's why I was asking Tim.
I
I've
do
had
have
people
with
ask
me,
for it.
But if it's a single family residence, it's probably contributing. Okay, so the second part, and there is some confusion here because I've just talked about national district. Well, this is National Avenue, nothing to do with National Registered District. This is the city's effort to try to define entry corridors that are deemed as significant tourist entry routes into the historic district, and specifically the local historic district. So council has created provisions in the zoning ordinance in the form of standards and guidelines that outline provisions unique to each of these corridors. We have about 8 or 9 corridors. We have already done Valley Avenue, the historic Valley Pike coming up from Kernstown Battlefield to about where the Coca-Cola plant is. That's already in the district. The Amherst Street corridor is another one, Cedar Creek Grade, Pleasant Valley Road from the Visitor Center coming up, and then a narrow corridor along Cork Street coming into the historic district. Most recent one was Berryville Avenue, and so the next one that is about to be adopted by council is the National Avenue corridor. And this one's kind of unique because it's predominantly residential, whereas most of the other ones I've mentioned are predominantly commercial. But this is the boundaries of it. So we have the post office over here along Berryville Avenue near the intersection with Pleasant Valley. The townhouses that are right across from the post office actually were included in the Berryville Avenue overlay district. It's kind of hard to see, but we have a designation of those districts down here. But this kind of teal color, this is the boundary of the proposed National Avenue Corridor Overlay District. And the idea is that from I-81, we already have Berryville Avenue in the district. This is the remainder of the State Route 7 entryway into the existing historic district. So that's why it terminates here at Kent Street and doesn't continue. We never want to have somebody be in both a national register or local historic district and a corridor overlay district. So to answer your question about National Avenue, they would be within this corridor overlay district. The thing is, these are guidelines for entry corridors, not necessarily Department of Interior standards. In fact, the intent is not to replicate the historic district standards and guidelines, particularly as spelled out by the Department of Interior, but instead to create some what really amounts to common sense kind of standards and guidelines about physical appearance of the structures. It does not alter the underlying zoning. Wow, colors are really bad there. Okay. So the red over here, where Schmaltz Florist Garden Shop was, that is commercially zoned. The overlay, which is represented in blue here, does not alter that underlying zoning. If you have a commercially zoned property, you still have a commercially zoned property with the overlay. It just means that if you're building or redeveloping the front portion of the Schmaltz property, then there'll be corridor overlay review of the design in this part, but on the back part, we would not be reviewing it from corridor enhancement. Most of the boundary runs to the back of the property, so that applies to certainly all the residential properties on both the south side of National Avenue as well as the north side. The Schmaltz property was a good example where this extended so far back from what we consider the view shed for tourists coming in on State Route 7 that we didn't feel it was appropriate to regulate design in the back there. Likewise, National Cemetery here, which is this education institution and public zoning EIP, just the front part out where the house and office is, garage, that would be, if they made alterations, and that would require approval from the city. So everything, for instance, from Lincoln Street over to where the new roundabout is in this area, those would all be required to secure a certificate of appropriateness, but instead of getting that from the Board of Architecture Review, it's from the Planning Department. And,
What's the timeline for them to have to comply?
well, that's an interesting way of phrasing the question, because there is no timeline for compliance.
Well, what I'm asking is this effective today? Is it effective 6 months from now?
Right. So the key with the corridor overlay district is that everything that exists today is grandfathered in.
Okay.
So there is no requirement for anybody who owns property in this district to have to make a change because of this designation. What it does say is that if you, the private property owner, choose to, for instance, change your shutters, your windows, your demolish a front porch or something like that, then it would have to be reviewed and approved and determined as to whether it's consistent with the guideline, which is things that we encourage or discourage people doing, but more importantly, whether it's in compliance with a standard that says this is what you may do or must do, in terms of can or cannot do. There's on National Avenue, most of the standards are geared toward things that pertain to residential use, because that's the predominant use there, but there are provisions also that apply to the commercial use there.
So to clarify, is that requirement in place now or in the future?
The standards and guidelines were adopted by council back in, I think, 2005. So they've been in the zoning ordinance ever since then. The overlay zoning district, however, is just now coming toward final adoption by council. They've had a first reading, the planning commission's held a public hearing. We had a public information meeting with the residents as well. We only had about fewer than a dozen people showed up for that.
I'm certain that my clients have no knowledge of this. So I would love if you could send me the presentation. I'll give you my business card with the actual.
We actually have the
Is it on your
presentation
website?
available on the city website.
Okay, I'll
So
hunt
you
it
don't
out.
even have to wade through the historic district stuff. So there's a couple of images, aerial photos, so you can kind of get a sense of the character of National Avenue. The homes are up fairly close to the street, a little closer together on the south side than they are on the north side there. In this area here, where the Smaltz property is, kind of zooming in on that, where the old house is, close to where the marker is for George Washington's outlot, the former garden center structure, which is something very much out of character with the guidelines. That's an example of what we would not want somebody to tear down, a more traditional residential structure to build more of that. But even like next door, for instance, this house I think is owned by Smaltz. Years ago, they closed in the front porch. It's just kind of like pressure treated lumber steps coming out the front, and not a very aesthetic kind of treatment of the front of the facade of the structure compared to preserving the porches that you otherwise see along the streetscape. That's really what this gets at. And I have 3 examples here. So this is a structure at 302 National Avenue. Ben Ritter was kind enough to share some of his historical photo collection with us. So we just kind of picked a couple of examples. On the left here, you can see from 1982, so not that far back. And again, the image here is hard to see, but you can see there were shutters on here. There were kind of details over the window. There were brackets up along the eaves here. All of those architectural features have been removed. I think this is probably vinyl. Interesting enough, they did preserve these very decorative porch columns and preserve the front porch. The wooden gate is removed, and now we just have a rusty chain link kind of thing there. So this is what I would consider kind of moderate alteration. And I do want to make it clear that there's nothing here that was done that would be in violation of those corridor enhancement standards, because again, this is not historic district, this is corridor overlay. So the fact that they may have done vinyl windows and removed the cornice and things, if it came push shove, they said, we just really don't like those brackets, the city would not be able to require them to preserve those. but we at least have the opportunity to encourage them to do things and maybe point out some resources in terms of funding that might be available in terms of a tax credit or something, so that before they just kind of wipe it out, that we can, tell them some of the benefits of preserving it and some of the financial assistance that might be available. So that was a kind of a moderate one. This is my poster child of what not to do with a residential structure. So Ben's historical photo from 1982 shows the structure here with the small porch and the period correct windows and such, stainless steel metal roof. And so now we have a very poor job with vinyl siding. The porch has been removed. The door is not transparent. The windows have been scaled down to some very cheap, smaller and probably economy grade windows. Of course, the air conditioner hanging out the front, asphalt shingle roof, elimination of the hedge out front and things. This is what I would call a severe alteration, and some of what was done here, as far as particularly removal of the porch, that would be something that we would not permit today. But again, we can't prohibit vinyl siding. We can't require that the windows be replaced, like you can guide the replacement of wooden windows in the historic district. But this is, I think, a good illustration of why we need to have some guidance, because
Tim, what would happen if these people did this now and they took the porch off? What enforcement mechanism exists if any?
So there are guidelines I think even in the National Avenue District, where they would be prohibited from totally removing the front porch.
What if they did?
Then it would be a zoning violation and could be prosecuted
Okay.
as a violation of city code. But again, a lot of what's in the corridor overlay districts is not, they're not all standards. A lot of it's just guidelines. So it's really just kind of introducing the opportunity for the city to say, do you really want to do that? And if you don't do it, here's how that contributes to that arrival experience along a tourist entryway. And as I said, there could be councils looking at developing some incentives. National Avenue is already in the enterprise zone, so there's things such as reimbursement of development fees, building permit fees and things that we would offer to people who did a more sensitive kind of renovation of a structure than what we have here. And then the far extreme is demolition and construction. So in 1982, this is the structure that was at 314 National Avenue, and the duplex here is what we have today. So, again, if the zoning otherwise permits it, it's not as though somebody can't build a duplex there, but we would certainly be looking for something a little better in terms of the architectural appearance, probably introduction of some kind of porch, some kind of change other than the cantilevered second floor here. So we reckon this actually, I believe, was destroyed by fire, or at least significantly damaged by fire. So it's not a situation where we come in and we say, oh, you got to rebuild this or refurbish the fire damaged structure, but definitely would want to have some guidance so that what gets placed there is in context of what the prevailing architectural style is. And in terms of some of the standards and guidelines, this is a kind of a guide to what we have there. There's a transparency ratio, which sounds very complex, but what it really comes down to is we want some balance. So over here, there's too much transparency. The glass curtain walls at this McDonald's, which incidentally has now been torn down. That was the one up in the county, up near Willtown Road, or the Goodyear facility. That's an unbalanced kind of wall facade. Whoa, how'd that happen? I'll wipe those down here. But at the other extreme, if you recall, across from the Thrift Center, the old PHW Lodge. Whoever thought this was an acceptable front facade for a building beyond me. And then out on Berryville Avenue, a building there that basically is just all wall. They've since, interestingly, they punched in a doorway and some windows on the back side of that building now. So these are kind of extremes in terms of, we're not saying exactly where the windows and doors need to be, but that there needs to be some balance in between these two extremes. Yes.
Are you talking just about the street elevations or all the elevations?
The guidelines are pertain to front and corner side, so a corner lot would have a corner side yard. The stricter standards, as far as not more than 2 to 1, for instance, you can have a balance of equal 50% open, with doors and windows to wall area, or extreme 2 to 1. On the rear and non-corner sides, that's where we basically say you can kind of go up to 4 to 1. So have very little window area and a lot of wall area, or a lot of window area and very little wall area. Again, a lot of it's just common sense. Don't stick all the dish antennas right out along the public street on the front of the building, even if that's the best place to get your antenna satellite signal. There's got to be some other place there. So regulating the location of mechanical units and dish antennas is one of the things that would be applicable. And then there's things like, yes?
Supposedly, the cable companies and dish companies have gotten approval to override local zoning ordinances on locations of those things. Read into that.
That is true, except in districts where there's architectural review. So historic districts and corridor overlay districts are the 2 exceptions where we can guide that kind of placement. We can't prohibit somebody. If they really can't get a signal anywhere else, then we have to allow it, but we can at least guide it. Apparently there's some auto advance feature in this presentation that I'm not aware of. So the other thing is steel the fences and walls, trying to preserve the limestone walls and discourage or prohibit the use of chain link fencing, particularly this is an example, I think, along Park Street. So again, a lot of it's just kind of common sense, things that most people would say, well, yeah, obviously that makes sense. So kind of transitioning now, we've talked about what we're asking the private property owners to do in the Corridor Enhancement District. And so from the public standpoint, in the public realm, obviously the city has done quite a bit to create a defined gateway here. You can see that we use the stone in the walls along there. We've created places where there'll be an opportunity to have interpretive markers, history panels, placed there. And this is an example, as long as we're zipping along automatically here. This is example 2 of the historic markers that were drafted to interpret early education of African Americans in Winchester, and to highlight Dr. Finley's dentist practice there, which was in a building along East Piccadilly Street near the intersection with East Lane. A historical photo here showing where his dental practice was, and kind of outlining the contribution that he made to the Black community here in Winchester. Those will be 2 of the 5 panels we're doing. There's 2 more, one of which I have here that Sandra's been very involved with doing the research on and collecting the photos and things, even borrowing a photo from Will Johnston from his Weaving a Common Thread book on the woolen mill, to talk about some of the early 20th century industrial heritage of the city. And so this particular one talks about some of the worker housing that was built, including, Will, this is your grandfather's house?
That's right.
Yeah. So
it's still there, but now it's impacted by a new one.
Yeah. So we're excited about that, and as I said, those will be interpretive markers that go in. The 2 for the African American will be up the hill here, and then the industrial heritage ones will be down closer to the Timbrook Center, where the old Virginia woolen mill was demolished. And the 5th one is a Civil War trails marker interpreting the final phase of the 3rd Winchester battle, where the Confederate troops were, as they said, whirling through Winchester, coming down from out along the Route 7 corridor, Berryville Pike, coming in through the streets of Winchester and retreating to the south, which ultimately led to Battle of Cedar Creek Grade. So that's the presentation. Glad to answer any questions on corridor enhancement or on the earlier presentation.
So, sorry,
Go ahead.
if I wanted to direct my clients to where they would go for information on possible credits or anything available to help improve their property, where would I send them?
I would encourage them to contact Kimberly Murray who is in the Economic Development Office,
Okay,
and works with the Economic Development Authority, EDA. Kimberly can be reached at the 667-1815 general number.
thank you.
And then the city's website also has links, that's winchesterva.gov. You can get to each of the departments, including planning and zoning, where we have the Corridor Enhancement District standards all spelled out.
Thank you.
Yes?
Are there any other, cities or small towns in the vicinity that you looked at that had already gone through this entryway, corridor enhancement process?
Yes.
Or sort of inspiration?
Yeah, I think it was early 90s maybe. We looked at what Leesburg had done, and then we also looked at Charlottesville and Williamsburg. They were 3 communities that had done some form of corridor enhancement zoning overlay before Winchester did. I think, with the possible exception of Williamsburg, I think Winchester now has more entryways included, in effect. But we still have, Planning Commission just recently said that Millwood Avenue should be the next one now that Shenandoah University is pretty much done digging in the dirt down there. That would be the next one we do. And then Fairmont Avenue, North Loudon Street, and the final segment of Valley Avenue, which is predominantly residential from the Coca-Cola plant up to the southern boundary of the historic district. Those are the ones that we haven't completed yet.
Start to move into architecturally less significant districts. I'm seeing a lot of effort to preserve communities that don't necessarily have the architectural significance, but might have historical significance as communities and so forth. Is Winchester, is that starting to percolate down through Virginia and Winchester regulatory organizations?
Well, so the Corridor Enhancement District, it's hard for a community to make use of that if they don't have a historic district or a historic site in the downtown area. You gotta have something there before you create the corridor leading to it in terms of under the enabling legislation and state code. Harrisonburg has struggled for years. Stanton, Winchester did a good job of setting in place provisions to preserve the architectural integrity of their downtown. Harrisonburg didn't get on that bandwagon. In fact, they're still kind of loose, and so they've had a lot of loss of integrity in the downtown. But they're utilizing other things. So to answer your question, there's other kinds of district arts. Arts and education, I think I forget what it is, arts and something district that some of those communities are using to kind of create artisan communities and providing incentives for people. Right now the private market is really driving a lot of young professionals to seek out small cities like Winchester, Stanton. So right now we're kind of benefiting regardless of what we do on the public side. People want to live and shop and play in downtown. Mr. Joe?
Tim, I'm rather surprised about the low turnout today, but I know you've done presentations for both the corridor enhancement and the national district expansion. What has been the feedback that you're getting? Are people happy with this? Are they worried about it?
I was pleasantly surprised. We had 2 public information meetings on separate occasions. So for the National Historic District expansion, I was sweating bullets because the room was full of people. I was like, what's their position? Mm-hmm. And we didn't get a single negative comment, I would say. Certainly nobody said they were opposed to it. And when the state sent out its notices and had its public meeting down in Richmond, they didn't get any negative. I had personally some conversations with a couple of property owners who were suspicious of what we were up to, but when we explained what we were doing, surprisingly, those were among some of the people who didn't even show up, even though we mailed notices. On the Corridor Enhancement District, we had very poor attendance, and I think that's more due to, and apathy, I would say. It's more due to the fact that an overwhelming majority of National Avenue properties are renter occupied. Yeah. So the people who are actually living in those structures, they don't have a financial interest in the upkeep of the building.
Is an effort made to reach the actual owners, to
We have
invite
to,
them?
that's who we have to contact, yes.
Okay.
And so we've heard from a number of them. Surprisingly, even some of the, what I would call absentee landlords are saying, oh, this is good, the reason I'm not maintaining my property is because nobody else does. And I'm like, okay, well, we'll see from here forward whether that changes.
Well, I think sometimes with landlords though, they're watching every penny, and so
Yeah.
they only put money in if they have to, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So-
Well, the city, made a huge investment, obviously, with the roundabout, and we're trying to do, we upgraded the utilities out on National Avenue. We put in all new sidewalks on both sides there. So the city council has expressed its intentions to upgrade that. And so there probably will be some tougher property maintenance enforcement that goes along with that. But all of that's enabled now. It's just a matter of, where council encourages concentrations of like what they call a community resource team that goes out and looks at it. And that includes police officers and zoning officers, public service, utilities people. So it's kind of a combined effort to try to address all of the ills at one time.
That's gonna help their properties.
Yes. Anything else? Yes.
Tim, what's going on in December to finalize this historic district?
I assume I'll get a letter around Christmas time that says, congratulations, the Winchester district
that
now
come
been listed. Hmm?
Where does it come from?
I'm guessing that it'll come through DHR. They have representatives who work with National Park Service as the, what do they call that, the SHPO, State Historic Preservation Officer, but they will notify us. I don't think I'll get a letter from Department of Interior otherwise.
And so what you've got now is final, right?
It's final in terms of the state. So property owners such as Winchester Little Theater, they can already realize the state tax credits because they're in the Virginia landmark registry already. And it's, John, what is it, 20% state and 25% federal, or the other way around?
I think it's the other way around.
Other way around, yeah. So, 45 cents on a dollar that you get back in the form of income tax credits for doing historic rehab, that's a serious incentive. And, Jim Vickers has made great use of it as an example, and quite a few other property owners have done likewise. All right, well, beautiful weather out there.
It's just excellent, seriously.
Yeah.
Better do it for the realtors. I mean, this increases property values and it really makes an attractive effort. And the realtors are the only people who reach the absentee people that in terms
Yes.
of selling it, what you have to do to fix it up. And just to let them know when you sell it, you can't just change things around until you get approvals and all that.
It's a great suggestion, and I've handed out some of the postcards. I don't know if you picked up one of those. We mailed those out to all of the owners of property in the local district, and I have been asked by council to address the board of realtors to talk not only about the expansion, but also the existing district where we've got, especially where council feels the pinch is when we get appeals of the decisions of the Board of Architecture Review, and then council's put into kind of a judicial function of either upholding the BAR's decision or overturning it or somehow modifying it. And that they, as elected officials, they don't like to tell property owners they can't do what they want to do.
I represent realtors being in the room, but I'm not sure if it's because I attended last year and I was on the mailing list. I don't know if the invitation actually came through our office for everyone to see. I didn't.
It's been a couple of years since I addressed the Blue Ridge Board of Realtors.
Well, no, I'm talking about, Jim Vickers' executive assistant if she received an invitation, she would have circulated it to the office. But I
Actually,
don't.
just threw me under the bus.
I'm just saying.
Yeah, I'm not going to go there.
I'm not sure, but I was surprised to be the only realtor in the room. So, especially because.
Well, I have committed to doing talking